Um, so can we have some more answers in the Slido, or maybe some of you want to share your answer? Maybe I can pick random people from the participant list. Let me check. So Danny Wong, do you have any myth that you know? That's your answer. I have any other myth you want to share with us? Maybe you can turn on your mic.
Sorry, what is it again? The answer or the question?
Tell us some funny myth that you have heard about COVID-19.
Oh, well, it's basically about the Bruneian thing. Oh, durian heals COVID-19.
Oh, the local fruit durian.
Yeah. The smelly one.
Yeah, I've heard about it as well. And does anyone has any more? Maybe you can write it in the chat box. Makan kunyit, and in English, Fadli, do you know what kunyit in English is?
Turmeric.
Oh yeah, eating turmeric. If you pray and place water and drink it, you will be immune to COVID. It's not airborne. Okay. So from the myth that you have seen in this Slido, maybe we can learn about the knowledge and the science behind it in the forum. Since we have some panelists who has some vast background in science, which is Ms. Prativa. So we will start the session by 8:10 p.m. Maybe some of you can start finding some comfortable position to watch the forum and also like take some notes. Maybe prepare your pen, tea, coffee for the 2-hour session. It's a biological weapon of conspiracy theory. With some shallots under the armpits for 5 minutes daily. It's good that some of you know that these are myth and it's not real. And I'm scared that some people are gonna try it because my dad like once tried the onion myth. He thinks that it's real and he bought a lot of onions. Metal in black so make us magnetic. Drink olive oil daily. Yeah, I have heard that some people also said that the vaccine makes us a zombie.
Time check, it is 8:09. Thank you everyone for all those funny myths that we'll be using. So that will actually help gauge the level of, I suppose, curiosity that our audience will be coming in. And I think we're also honoring the request to Prativa. So there's your machine gun of myths that I think you can come in to shoot down in any case. So my clock hit is almost 8:10. I think we'll just start in a few seconds. So if you are there, come in, sit in, have a glass of water, and settle down so we can have a comfortable homebound workshop series on our first ever forum for today. Okay. I think without further ado, I think I'll just start if no one If everyone's good, yeah? Start in 10 seconds. I think we'll just have the music toned down a bit, yeah, Mims, for Surah Al-Fatihah. Hi, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Live here from Bandar Seri Begawan. You're here joining us for the Homebound Workshop Series for the Forum on Vaccine Hesitancy and Misinformation. My name is Fadli. I'll be your fellow moderator / host together with Nadia. And I think acknowledging our fellow Shaper Hubs who might be joining us from around the world and also from our fellow Bruneians who are just joining us here on Zoom as participants in the Homebound Workshop Series, as well as those who are joining us live on YouTube. Quite exciting times. How are you doing, Nadia?
Thank you, Fadli, for opening the session. And I'm really doing well tonight. I'm really anticipating this forum. And hi, guys. Some of you might have known me from the workshop yesterday. So, yeah. How are you, Fadli, today?
I'm good, Alhamdulillah. A whole myriad of forums this week, to be honest, and just another one I just finished on mental health of the bloom. But very happy that global shapers are just shaping here and there. Well, with that, let us just start with Surah Al-Fatihah. I'll cue you, Binti.
الفاتحة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين 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 بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم إنا نستحفظك ونستودعك ديننا وإيماننا وأنفسنا وأهلنا وأولادنا وذرياتنا والمسلمين وأموالنا وكل شيء أعطيتنا اللهم اجعلنا وإياهم في كنفك وأمانك وجوارك وعياذك من كل شيطان مريد وجبار عنيد وذي عين وذي بغي ومن شر كل ذي شر إنك على كل شيء قدير اللهم جملنا بالصحة والسلامة وحققنا بالتقوى والاستقامة وأعذنا من موجبات الندامة في الحال والمآل إنك مجيب الدعوات اللهم إنا نسألك سلامة في الدين وعافية في الجسد وزيادة في العلم وبركة في الرزق وتوبة قبل الموت ورحمة عند الموت ومغفرة بعد الموت اللهم هون علينا في سكرات الموت والنجاة من النار والعفو عند الحساب اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا ووالدينا ومشايخنا ووالديهم وإخواننا وأخواتنا ولمن أحسن إلينا والمؤمنين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم اختم لنا بحسن الخاتمة ولا تختم علينا بسوء الخاتمة ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين آمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Amin, Amin, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Thank you. That was Awang cut from Global Shapers. So as with our customs and norms, just to bless today's event, thank you for being with us once again for the Homebound Workshop Series for this forum. Before I give the mic to Nadia, so just a bit, just once again, if you aren't familiar already with the Global Shapers, Bandar Seri Begawan, or GSC BSP is a community of passionate individuals of youth championing youth unemployment issues through capacity building, empowering young people to shape a brighter future for themselves. So as with any of our initiatives, this is just one of the key examples as we are battling the second wave pandemic by, catering to the new normal and meeting you guys virtually. So it's quite an exciting time. And if I can just ask everyone to just say hi, make use of your reaction buttons. I'm just gonna just gonna throw a confetti there. So that's our reaction button. Make sure to just try that out. I want to see that everyone's here still alive. If you are able to open your camera, that's great. We won't expect you to speak, but it'd be great that I have an audience that I can see. Also, thank you for saying hi as well on the chat box. I'm just gonna say hi. Hi, Fadli here. There's some ASMR for you on my keyboard. So it's a nice way just to ask if you can also share from where you're from, if not from Brunei, maybe Tutong, Brunei Muara. I am from Sungai Basar. So people will know where I live now. If
I'm
you can
from
just share
Kampong
that.
Sarasa.
There you go, from Kampong Serasa. Thanks
And
everyone for just coming and joining in. It's great. Can see that there are a lot of people coming in from different districts in Brunei and hopefully other countries as well that's joining in. That's just a bit of Global Shapers. I hope that gives you a bit of an education of what we do. I'm gonna give back the mic to Nadia just to share on the session details and about maybe about some of our speakers. Maybe maybe I could also share while you are on here. Please feel free to participate in our social media, our Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn at globalshapers.bsp. Hashtag GSC Homebound. So don't forget your hashtags there. Also, a couple of things along the way. Nadia, floor is yours.
so thank you, Fadli, for introducing Global Shapers. I'm a proud shaper myself. So I just want to tell you what this forum is about. So in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, this session aims to understand the inner workings of vaccine and the key role that vaccines play in tackling the pandemic. It also aims to explore vaccination hesitancy of the public and combating fake news and misinformation relating to vaccines from the view of health professionals. So Fadli, do you have anything to say before we start our workshop?
I think just to recap today's session, the session is not just about our speakers, but it's also about you. I would like to build this conversation between you and I. Also, I think we have some wonderful backdrops that Athirah, myself, Nadia, and Pravita is using at the moment. So that's credits to Safwan Siddiq, one of our local photographers, and a beautiful landscape from Brunei. Also, we will have Slido as a way for you to channel some of your questions and just to do this seamlessly. We'll have our technical team just putting that up in a bit. So don't you worry. For this session and how we'll start, I think right after this, I'll give the chance for Nadia to just maybe to introduce herself briefly, and also I think I'll take the chance to also introduce Athirah, and then later on Nadia will introduce Pravita, Miss Pravita, on just some of the things they will be sharing for the session, and then we'll have an opening with a few questions and some question and answers from the audience as well. Maybe Nadia, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Fadli. I am Nadia Haji, and I am a global shaper from Bandar Seri Begawan, and I'm passionate about reading self-help books and also journaling. Yeah. So without further ado, maybe I can introduce our panelist for tonight. She has more than a decade of working experience in the public sector in the field of public relations. She was involved in some volunteering work, tackling issues of inequality of education, health and safety for children in Australia with Oxfam. She is also associated with a local NGO, namely Care and Action for Strays. On top of that, she is also one of the person who is heavily involved behind our COVID-19 press conference that we watch every day. As the head of corporate communications for Ministry of Health Brunei, let's welcome Puan Athirah Yussof to introduce herself and say hi to the audience.
Assalamualaikum and very good evening and good morning to everyone, wherever you are. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and also thank you to Fadli and Nadia for moderating this evening's forum. And hello, Ms. Prativa Baral. I'm glad, to be involved in this forum, and I hopefully I can share based on my experiences from the Ministry of Health, and hopefully I can answer any of your questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Puan Athirah. Next, we will have our panelists that we invited all the way from Canada. Despite the awkward timing, it must be around 8 a.m. there. It's 12 hours difference. She is an epidemiologist, a social scientist, a PhD candidate from Department of International Health, and a student from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. On top of that, she is also a global shaper from Toronto. May I invite Ms. Prativa Baral? Maybe you can turn on your mic to say hi to the audience.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a really pleasure to be here with you today. I'm really excited for the discussion today. My background is obviously in epidemiology and in public health. So if you have any questions or any myths that you're concerned about vaccines, about misinformation, I'm here to answer them. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and getting to know Brunei a little bit better. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prativa. Now I will pass the floor back to Fadli.
Thanks, Nadia. So I think it's a very interesting format we're taking up between myself and Nadia. Nadia is also as shadowing me actually for moderating. So a lot of applaud to her taking up this very brave challenge of public speaking and moderating, and also a bit of break for me from talking too much as well. My name is Fadli. I guess I host as a hobby and now for much of a living to do. I just finished a mental health workshop earlier today, and another ASEAN Summit I'm hosting next week. So it's been an exciting journey here with Brunei's ASEAN Chairmanship. At my day job, I work at the government statutory body, but I think with young people and with global shapers, I convene forums like these. So it's quite lovely to do this in a more specialized manner, looking at public health and all. I'm just going to go straight into the meat of it. I understand Ms. Pravita will have some slides, which Nadia will help introduce. But I'm just going to put the spotlight here first to Puan Athirah. Puan Athirah, you are a lady behind a powerhouse behind the press and running press conference from day to day. And I understand it's a huge challenge having to push for vaccination rates, especially as we go towards an endemic situation here in Brunei. How is the current, well, just generally speaking, the current landscape here for Brunei with its vaccination campaign, your experiences as just a corporate comms officer? I think that in general, I'm just curious about, and I think it's quite lovely that we have this whole Oyen campaign as well. Maybe bits and pieces of teasers of what you might be sharing for the rest of this hour. Puan Athirah, you have your next 5 minutes on your floor.
Thank you, Fadli. Just to correct you, I'm not the powerhouse. There's a whole team behind the press conferences, but thank you for that lovely comment. But basically tonight, like I said earlier, Ms. Prativa will be giving the presentation, but from my side, it's more of sharing the experiences. And Alhamdulillah, we've seen a lot of, ramping up in terms of the vaccination. I guess it's because of we're currently facing the second wave. Although at first, to be honest, it was a bit slow from our side. We were a bit worried and concerned because we know there was a lot of hesitancy, especially from the senior citizens. So I'll be sharing in brief on what it is that we did from the Ministry of Health to overcome these challenges. I wouldn't say they are issues, but a challenge. And we do love a challenge from MOH. So, we overcame them, and then we're also frequently facing communication challenges, which we have to, be always on our toes, and then sharing in terms of our experiences on how we tackle misinformation, which is a lot, as I'm sure you are aware. And also how to engage with the different demographics. It's not easy. You can't just use Oyen. Oyen will not be something, Alhamdulillah, everyone is acceptable of Oyen. Like I said earlier, who doesn't love cats, right? But of course, if you were to engage with the senior citizens, for example, you have to have a seriousness in terms of it. So I'll be sharing in terms of what we did in terms of the demographics, how we went about with it, how we used the influences, not just from the minister's influences, with his, the lovable minister, alhamdulillah, and then also from other influences, like for example, social influences like Rano Adidas, how we roped him in and to help us out, and then other aspects as well. So hopefully I won't bore you too much tonight. Hopefully it's something that you can find useful. That you can sort of share with your friends and families that vaccination is very important, because now that we have the second wave, unfortunately, and sort of in a sense a blessing, I would say, because it, like I said, it did ramp up our vaccination rate, but we need to come back to I don't think we can go back to how life was before, but we need to go back to new normal, and we can only do that by getting everyone vaccinated, anyone that is eligible. So I think that is just in brief of what it is that I would share, inshallah, later. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Athirah. I take note you are among a team of powerhouses in the Ministry of Health. And I think that's a really good thesis statement about how the kind of the number of points that will be shared later on and throughout the session, with the number of tackling misinformation, tackling the different demographics, influences. And I think just for disclaimer, Oyen is a how do you put it, a mascot, yeah, that has just propped up well, the orange cat, really, Oyen, or orange, being a play of words, just for everyone's information. And that has become sort of a figure, an animated figurehead that motivates people to get into this whole vaccination campaign. I think it's also quite interesting to note about senior citizens, and I think how the reaction might be as well for the younger demographics as well. Thank you so much, Athirah. I'll let well, there's a lot of questions that I don't want to ask, but I'll just pause myself there and let Nadia introduce Prativa for her own remarks and also maybe her presentation slide. Nadia, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prativa, for joining us in this event, even though you had to wake up early, of course. And so what really piqued our interest about your background is your epidemiology discipline, which is not a very well-known discipline to some of our audience tonight. So maybe in your presentation, you can explain more about it and how valuable is your expertise at the time of COVID-19 pandemic. And if you're ready to share your slides and start the presentation, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Nadia. Before I start my presentation, I do want to respond to your question. I understand that epidemiology was something that nobody really knew before the pandemic, unless you were studying it, of course. So before I start, I'd like to just give a brief background on what exactly epidemiology is. And in the context of COVID, I think the easiest way to understand what it is really like being a disease detective. Which sounds very fancy, but it's not fancy at all. It's essentially doing science in a way, and in order to understand why something happens, how something happens, to whom does this happen, and what are the relationship between things we see. So for example, the COVID pandemic and things we might not know about, like who's getting sick from COVID? Have they had previous exposure to something else? What is their age? What is their environment? And so, the word epidemiology actually comes from a Greek word, epi, which means on or upon, and demos, which means people, and logos, which means the study of. So essentially, epidemiology is the study of population. And so there's a more fancy definition for what exactly it is. So I should say it as well. It's really the study of better understanding the distribution, the risk factors, the causes of health-related issues in a specific population. And then you apply what you've learned to control health problems. So again, if I bring it back to the context of COVID, we're looking at risk factors or determinants. We ask ourselves why or how are certain groups with different rates of COVID differing in their behavior, in their age, their gender, and other exposures. And that's really helpful because we learned that COVID through epidemiology is much, much more severe among those who are seniors, among those who are immunocompromised. And so we can target that population to get vaccinated first, for example. So that's epidemiology, and it's a fascinating source of science. And so I urge anybody who's interested to learn more about it to look into it some more or to reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about epidemiology. So I'll get started with my presentation today. I'll try to be very brief, but vaccine hesitancy and misinformation is something that I think all of us care very much about. As Ms. Athirah mentioned, we are never going to go back to the normal that we had before the pandemic. And so the best option we have of moving forward and achieving this new state of normal is through vaccines and to get vaccinated. So today I'm hoping to kind of give you an overview of what vaccine hesitancy is, what are misinformation like, what are certain ways of recognizing how these misinformation pieces are being spread, and just to get a general sense of what all of this is about in the context of COVID-19. So next slide, please. Thank you. So before we begin, I wanted to provide a snapshot of where we are today. This is a map taken from the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center. And we can see by the little red peppered dots that there's virtually no region around the world that hasn't been affected by COVID-19. The United States, if you look on the left side, is currently topping the global records for cases, followed by India and the United Kingdom. And given the way that the virus SARS-CoV-2, which is what causes COVID-19, operates, the emergence of new variants such as Delta and Mu continue to add a layer of uncertainty as to when this pandemic will be over and when we'll get to that new normal, a more stable, a more endemic state of affairs. Next slide. So in response to this global chaos, we have made remarkable progress scientifically through incredible global collaboration and large amounts of funding towards this. And we have several vaccines at our disposal. So we have mRNA vaccines, of which you might know Moderna and Pfizer. We also have protein subunit vaccines, a mechanism that the Novavax vaccine employs. And then we also have vector vaccines, and that's similar to AstraZeneca. So all of these types of vaccines, what they really do is they prepare your immune system to recognize any exposure to the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that causes COVID-19, so that your body is equipped to fight back against it and recognizes it instead of being surprised. And that's why for most people who've been fully vaccinated, the chances of them becoming very sick due to COVID-19 is very, very low. And that's because these vaccines are very effective at preventing severe COVID, hospitalization, and death. Next slide. And beyond the vaccines that I mentioned, if we look at this vaccine tracker from the New York Times, there's a ton of different vaccines in different phases of clinical trials right now, over 100 different types of products, all at different stages, which may, eventually, once the clinical trials are completed and we see that the vaccines are safe and that they work, there will be additional tools that the world can use to protect itself from being really sick with COVID-19. So we have a disease, and then we have vaccines that are really great at protecting against severe illness. So, problem solved, right? Vaccinate everyone, and then we're good to go. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. Yes, that was good. Good. Back to the next slide, please. Thank you. This paper is from last year. So this was published in Nature Medicine, a scientific journal, and this was a few months after the pandemic started. So in June 2020, before vaccines were available, and about 13,000 people in 19 countries were asked, if a COVID-19 vaccine is proven to be safe and effective and is available, would you take it? And 71% overall of respondents said that they would be very likely or somewhat likely to take a vaccine. But you can see that the rates of acceptance vary from country to country. So we all have almost 90% of respondents, on the left side in China, for example, saying they'd accept the vaccine. But if we go down the list, we have as low as roughly 50% of the respondents from Russia saying that they would accept it. So clearly vaccine hesitancy varies by region, varies by population, varies by country. And it's very much a problem that we're facing, that we were facing back in June and we're still facing today. Next slide. So what's going on? Why would you not take a safe and effective vaccine when we know that COVID-19 is a brand new virus that can cause really rough illness, especially among those who are not vaccinated, and can virtually affect everybody. So this study looked at COVID-19 vaccine among healthcare workers in Canada to kind of understand the why. Why is acceptance not as high as we would want it to be, especially because you'd expect healthcare workers to be the first ones to want to get vaccinated. And if you look up here in red, there are the reasons that people cited as being very important to them. And some of the most important reasons included concerns because this is a new vaccine. And remember, this study was done in December 2020, so almost a year ago, preferring that other people get the vaccine first, lack of information about the vaccine, don't have enough time to take a decision. And quickly, to make you feel better, because if these are some of your concerns, if you're concerned that this is a new vaccine, remember that we've used vaccines for decades. We didn't create this from scratch, but we utilized our scientific knowledge from previous vaccines. There was incredible global collaboration and so much funding, so much money, because everyone was throwing money in this direction. We were able to get vaccines that worked more quickly because we had the money and the resources to put into them. But yeah, so these were some of the reasons that were listed back in December 2020. Next slide. But unless you are aware of all of this, you might be concerned, and some are even completely against it. So this survey was done by Pew Research, where they asked, again, US adults who said they probably or definitely will not get the vaccine. What and why was their reasoning? And again, we see some similar reasons why, with major reasons including concerns about side effects, concerns that the vaccine was developed too quickly. Again, I should remind you that we didn't skip any phases when testing it, and issues about, but still that seems to be a prevalent concern among many. And other reasons were issues about trust with the medical system and just against the vaccines, or don't think that COVID is really a big of a deal. So a lot of misinformation out there as well. Next slide. So how did this happen? Why are there so many concerns and so many different narratives about COVID and their vaccines? And a common theme we've seen historically, but also during this pandemic, is that there is a ton of uncertainty during a crisis. People's lives have changed drastically. Our systems, our health systems, our economic systems, our food systems, our education systems, all of our systems have received a massive shock at a global scale, and not just one acute one, but one that has kept going over and over again for 18 months. You know, some countries have had 4 waves. Brunei has had 2 waves. Certain countries have had one ongoing large wave. And so there's a lot of shocks that our countries and our world are currently facing. And add to this, not just uncertainty, but also the evolving nature of the pandemic, because this virus is brand new. And as a result, we have a situation where the science is also evolving. And as we collect more data and learn more about the virus and the disease, recommendations change as we learn more. So what do we do when there's a ton of uncertainty and a ton of information, at times where that information is quite confusing? So we find coping mechanisms. And one way that we've coped with this collective ongoing trauma is by sharing information, irrespective of the source, with each other. And I hope you know where I'm going with this. When there's a lot of sharing, next slide, please. You have a lot of false information that are being spread around. And so we have lots of uncertainty. People's lives have been impacted heavily with all these changes. And add to this, lots of outlets and random non-credible sources sharing information and social media circulating this information. And so we have various fake news or false narratives about unproven treatments like hydrochloroquine and about how or why this pandemic is happening that are being circulating around. Next slide. So how does that information spread, and why does it spread so quickly? And the truth here is that there is a strategy that is being used by various interest groups or people on how to best spread this false information. And I hope recognizing this will help you recognize what are these strategies that are being used, so that when you see an information that's floating around, you're more aware. So the 6 badges that you see here reflect the key techniques that are used to produce fake news and manipulate people. So we have impersonation here. That's where someone pretends to be an expert and spread fake news. Polarization, that's when you specifically say something to create more divide. Like, for example, there's a new study that shows that people who are conservatives are more intelligent than people who are liberals. So this headline is less about research, or not at all about research, and more about how do we divide people and drive them apart. There's also the conspiracy strategy. We've seen these quite a bit with COVID, and a few of you mentioned the many, many myths at the very beginning of this program, when someone mentioned a microchip myth, for example. So that's a conspiracy theory that has no founded, there's no data or evidence behind it, and it's not real. There's the discrediting strategy. This is a strategy that's been used since forever to discredit scientists who are bringing news about COVID or discrediting COVID itself. Emotion is also a really powerful technique that's being used. It's calling on people to feel instead of thinking critically about what they're reading. So, for example, in parts of North America, what we often hear nowadays is using the argument of freedom against vaccines. And that's being used to appeal to people's emotions about their country, their definition of freedom. But if you actually take a step back and think through a little bit about it, that argument or that rationale doesn't really make sense. And the final strategy that's being used is trolling. And we've all heard of trolls, intentionally trying to introduce conflicts and hostility. And so why do we care about all of this? So what if misinformation and disinformation is out there? Well, this matters because if people believe what they're reading or take on some of these harmful suggestions for treatments, for example, they can get really hurt and harm themselves. And more broadly, this may also affect their risk perception. So if you're reading that COVID is not a big deal, that it's being exaggerated, then their behaviors will reflect that low risk perception, endangering not just themselves, but their communities around them. So there's also lots of studies to show that people who believe in this type of information are also less likely to trust experts, to follow public health guidelines, and to be vaccine hesitant. So these 6 strategies are something to keep in mind when you're consuming news, to make sure that the news outlets or the source that's spreading that information aren't using these strategies to make you feel a certain way or to divide you up or to polarize you. Next slide, please. So vaccine hesitancy specifically is a spectrum. So on the pyramid on your right, you can see how some people will accept it unquestionably. Others will have concerns and then accept the vaccines, and others may have concerns and are hesitant and are late or selective in getting vaccinated. And then you have a small group at the very top that are anti-vaxxers, that are decliners. And there are lots of studies that have been investigating the reasoning for hesitancy, and it can be everything from political ideology to mistrust in government and scientific institutions, perhaps negative experiences with the healthcare systems. And it's also really important to know that for many, we might think they're hesitant when really it's a question about affordability or access to the vaccines. Next slide. So why is this? Why does this happen? And that's because science doesn't operate in a vacuum, which means that in response to these concerns or hesitancy or misinformation, sharing science and scientific studies alone doesn't necessarily help. There's a lot of other issues at stake. There's polarization, there's social capital, trust is a big one, income inequality, that all of these contribute to various levels of acceptance to science, to science-based policies, and ultimately to vaccines. Next slide. I promise I'm almost done. And that's why currently we're not just dealing with a pandemic. So this image is probably something that you've all seen. We're also dealing with an infodemic where information, misinformation, and disinformation spreads almost like a virus and can be deadly. So these quick shares on WhatsApp, on social media platforms, they rack up really, really quickly and reach huge audiences. Next slide. And actually, it's not just misinformation, right? There's 2 different types of false information that are being spread. It's misinformation and disinformation. So misinformation is information that's incorrect or misleading. It might not necessarily be created to hurt people intentionally. So for example, the gargling with the salt water that some of you mentioned at the beginning, people saying that sunlight is, going to cure COVID. Both of these things aren't harmful per se, but they're not going to cure you of COVID either. And then there's disinformation. So these are information that are deliberately crafted, and it's designed to hurt, to mislead, deceive people. So for example, saying COVID is fake, that it doesn't exist, that vaccines have a microchip, They do not. And, this is a whole thing that's exaggerated by government. So that's also a disinformation. Also not true, because if you remember one of the first slides that I shared, we've lost over 6.5 million lives to this disease. So it's definitely not exaggerated. So fundamentally, though, both of these misinformation and disinformation, irrespective of intentions or innocent mistakes, spreading any type of false information disrupts science-based responses and disrupts trust in the scientific process and in our ability to end this pandemic as quickly as possible. Next slide. So in fact, I thought this would be an interesting report that some of you might want to look up. And the Center for Countering Digital Health, which is a center, I think, based in the US, tracked 425 anti-vaccine accounts and discovered that their total following was close to 60 million people in December 2020. And I'm sure it's much, much, much larger now. And so their report stated that, the Disinformation Dozen, which is the name of the report, stated that just 12 individuals and their organizations are responsible for most of the anti-vaccine content shared or posted on Facebook and Twitter. So 12 people. And so that just goes to show you the immense power and ease at which misinformation and disinformation can spread. Next slide. 2 more slides, and then I'll be done. So what do we do? This is from the WHO, the World Health Organization, talking through some tips to navigating this influx of information. So you can read here quickly. The first thing you do is check your source, who is sharing it. Don't just read the headlines, but the piece itself. Figure out who the author is and investigate them. Do they have weird conflicts of interest? What's their history? Check the date to see if the piece is current. Look at the supporting evidence. Are they anecdotes, or do they actually have data and evidence from reputable sources backing them up? Check your biases. And I think that's a super important one as well. Are you looking at a source that you normally really like, which affects your ability or judgment to say whether something is trustworthy or not? And 7, look into fact checkers or reputable sources whose sole job is to debunk any misinformation out there. And last slide. And so finally, specifically to address vaccine hesitancy, there are a few tips here that I've put together. And fundamentally, it's about communications, it's about empathy. People's concerns are absolutely valid, especially in times of such chaos and uncertainty. So there are a couple of things that you can do, which is sharing appropriate resources from public health organizations. From the side of the governments, what we've been doing in Canada is, tailoring communications, making sure the language that's being used is accessible to the people that you're sharing it. So similar to what was mentioned earlier, what you would share to seniors wouldn't necessarily be the same type of messaging that you would share to younger people. And other mechanisms that have worked really well in terms of addressing vaccine hesitancy is partnering with family physicians who are trusted by almost everybody, partnering with community and religious organizations. So I can tell you an example that we've done here, again in Canada, is partnering with mosques because a couple of people had concerns about whether they should get the vaccine or not. So we partnered with mosques and even made the vaccines available at the mosque so that when people were visiting them, they would get vaccinated. And also, improving access. So mobile clinics, availability in workplaces, community and religious spaces. And I've also listed a couple of quote unquote games that you can play when you're done this workshop. And essentially it was created by psychologists, I believe, and people who study misinformation to kind of give you a sense of how things go viral and how misinformation spreads. So this will hopefully give you a sense of how this huge infodemic is occurring at the same time as the pandemic. And with that, I think I've taken enough of your time today. If you have any questions or any concerns, I'm happy to answer them. I'm always available by email, and I look forward to having a fruitful discussion with all of you now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prativa, for that very valuable and very informative slides and your presentation. Actually, I really enjoy it. Like, I learned a lot of science behind it, and also from what I understand, epidemiology is basically the research of the population and also the demographic. And what you said really, I can see that it is related to what Puan Athirah said before, that Puan Athirah is more into delivering and raising awareness to the public. Meanwhile, Ms. Prativa is more about researching what the public, their behavior and their reaction and the distribution of this vaccine, and a lot on that area. So I can see that both of your disciplines and also backgrounds, Puan Athirah and Ms. Prativa, is quite, there is a similarity to it. So what really piqued my interest from your slide presentation is that there is misinformation and also disinformation, where misinformation, you can educate people to think critically about the information that they get, whether it is accurate or not. And then I'm just wondering, like, do you have any suggestions on what resources that people can see and look for fact-checking the information that they get, other than WHO, and maybe there's other websites that people can look at? Since there are so many resources,
Yeah, absolutely. So I would definitely start with the WHO. The CDC in the United States is also a good source of information. And the other thing I would say is really the public health organizations, the Ministry of Health. I'm not too familiar with Brunei's context, but in Canada, our government sends out a lot of information debunking some of these myths. And so relying on your governments and their expertise and the public health people that are working in the government is also always a good option to make sure that the information you're receiving is accurate and appropriate.
Thank you very much for that answer. Maybe also Puan Athirah can explore more about what resources, other than people getting resources from the press conference and also the Instagram that MOH always sending their information about the COVID-19 updates. Maybe is there any other resources that Bruneian can fact check for the information that always going viral, like for example on WhatsApp right now, because there are a lot of stories and we don't know the accuracy of it. So what do you think we can do for that, Puan Athirah?
Thank you. So basically from the Ministry of Health, we do work closely, especially from the Corporate Communications Division. We work closely with our colleagues from Public Health because we have also the public health experts here as well. So the information that we communicate is not just solely disseminated from the communications from my office, but basically for this information and to get information from the Ministry of Health, you can actually just reach out to us. Either I know 148 is always, people are always complaining about it. I apologize for that, but we're receiving a lot of influx of calls. But you can reach us out at 148. Either via phone or Telegram or on WhatsApp or via email, or you can just, which I think some of you have my number. I don't know how, but I have been receiving a lot of questions from the general public itself. So as much as I can, I will, answer your queries. And I believe the platform that the public always frequently uses, but the press conferences, because that's where the public also shares their questions to the minister. And we have actually made several public engagements before the vaccination rollout. So we did have community engagement sessions with not just the senior citizens, we did community engagements internally. So just in a nutshell, MOH website, social media, send us an email or reach out to us personally. You can email me if you want. I can share my email as well after this. But you can also call 148. But as much as we can, we do want to reach out to the public because we, as Ms. Prativa explained earlier, that misinformation is very dangerous actually because of this pandemic. It's very important for us to address any misinformation, although it's very difficult to address all of them, but it's very important to address.
Thank you very much for that, Puan Athirah. I'm pretty sure your suggestions and also the information that you have given us can be beneficial for our audience tonight. And maybe Fadli, do you have some questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Nadia, for the wonderful synthesis. And I think it's nice that she's been able to link between the two speakers on providing and sharing the resources, which really hits back on the intention of the session here on tackling misinformation and vaccine hesitancy. I found it quite interesting as well on the canvassing that Prativa really touched on. And for me personally, quite curious on how a new state of normal could look like, especially how this virus is always evolving. I think one day in the first wave we're dealing with just the normal variant, and then suddenly it's a Delta. I'm wondering how these changes of SOP how are we able to cope in the current environment and situation? My mother is a nurse at PPAS, so she has this whole burden of trying to manage 100 over patients coming in a day. And you know, if that is a new state of new normal, how is that going to be? Anyway, that's just some rants coming from me from my reactions to that. But I understand Brunei comes from a whole of nation approach, and I'm also reading some of the questions here. And if there are speakers hasn't been able to scan through them, don't not to worry so much. But I do want to appreciate that point about misinformation versus disinformation, and having that sort of thing against a figure like 6.5 million, having lives lost to this COVID. It's quite disheartening, really. And you know, the opinion of anti-vaxxers and the vaccine hesitancy, I don't think accessibility is not so much of an issue. But and with such a with such a support system within our government as a whole of nation, I understand that there could be like a whole COVID-19 crisis team that works between ministries to handle that. And I'm also wondering some thoughts as well on maybe the role of NGOs as well to kind of channel some of this information. But kind of narrowing it down to a question, maybe back to Athirah, and then I'll come back to Prativa as well. I wanted to get some of your reactions as well from Prativa's presentation slide, especially how are we what your opinion or views are with anti-vaxxers in the Brunei landscape, and you mentioned also about the older generation as being a potential point of tackling this as well. And I also want to pick up one question as well. One of the things that our honorable minister mentioned towards tackling the second wave, as Prativa also puts it, is vaccination, and reaching that herd immunity. And how do we, and this is a question from one of our audience, and how are we going to reach towards that? Especially now thankfully we have two sets of vaccines that were just donated from Australia and China, so that's a really good sign. Anyway, I'd like to hear more from you, Nadia, on this.
Yeah, thank you, Fadli. So basically, in terms of anti-vaxxers in Brunei, although it's not as prevalent as other countries, like for example in US, but I believe we do have anti-vaxxers here, but they're not just as vocal, I guess, in the actual social media platforms, maybe on Reddit. But I do know that we do have anti-vaxxers here as well. Probably not as dangerous as I would say in terms of the opinions that they disseminate. I believe that they're more of because as what Ms. Prativa said, this virus is new and this vaccine is new, so there's a lot of hesitancy there. So I wouldn't say they are dangerous in nature, but in terms of how we tackle these demographics, or in terms of how we tackle these people, basically we had to socialize, and then we had to engage with the community. So that's what we did from the Ministry of Health. And then we also did conduct a national survey and public acceptance on the COVID-19 vaccine use in sometime in January. So from there on, although it was not a lot of participation because it was used on BruHealth, unfortunately, at that time, not a lot of people used BruHealth. But basically from there, we sort of had we were able to capture a snapshot in terms of the public's perception and acceptability on the COVID-19 vaccination itself. And then in terms of where we are in terms of reaching herd immunity, I believe Yang Muhammad Datu did say that the aim is not solely just to reach herd immunity anymore, it's just to get everyone vaccinated. everyone that is eligible to get vaccinated. And so at first, the aim was to get 70% of the population to be vaccinated. Now I think we do want to ramp it up to 80% of the population to be vaccinated. And how we achieve this is to make sure that everyone understands the importance of vaccination as a whole, because we cannot get out of this second wave if we don't get everyone vaccinated, basically. So I think that's what the minister has been communicating all this time, and what the Ministry of Health has been communicating. And then in terms of the national whole of nation approach, we do have a national coordination center, or what we call it National COVID-19 Coordination Response Center, N3C19 for short. It's not widely promoted yet, I believe, because it was quite recently set up. So this National Coordination Center, as I'm sure some of you are aware, it's based at ICC. So this is where the whole of nation approach comes into play. So it's not just the Ministry of Health, because we cannot, tackle this on our own. So we had other agencies. So this is where NGOs come into play. They, from KKBS side, from the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports, they helped us to disseminate the food rations more effectively and more efficiently. And then in terms of the military assistance, in terms of transporting the positive patients to the COVID holding areas. So it's, as like you said, we need everyone's help, not just from trying to tackle this. We need to have everyone understand the importance of vaccination, basically. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh no, that was wonderful. I've actually been very, very much curious on how the inner workings and the coordination, especially this part on ICC as well, is quite something I'm actually more curious about. Probably more as we get into that. And thank you for sharing that breath. And now I just want to pivot back to Prativa. I think we have some good questions in retrospect on Slido as well. Just some two that I think I can select here for you. I think there's a general vibe here about, and these are also discussions that I have from friends as well. But which team are you on? Like what team? Oh, different vaccines. Like team Moderna. Oh, okay, all right. And a lot of us would be telling us like, oh, what's the pros and cons of one? Should I cancel my vaccine appointment and wait for the next one and all that? And that's on one side of the corner. The other corner would be which vaccine should I use to be more effective against a certain strain. So in this case, I think one of the questions mentioned about the mu strain, or what strains are out there, like how much are they different, and how much should we be concerned? I think that was a cheeky comment here about, oh, why is it called beta, or is it bigger of its size, or something along those lines. So it's a two-part question there for you, Prativa, on different vaccination types and our awareness on different strains.
Yes, absolutely. I also wanted to respond to the herd immunity question from earlier as well. So exactly like Ms. Athirah said, I think at this point in time, our goal is not so much to reach herd immunity. I think when we were dealing with the original strain, the original COVID virus that was introduced to our world back in January, herd immunity was definitely something that we wanted to reach with the help of the vaccines. Now we have Delta, and Delta is a lot more transmissible, a lot more infectious than the original strain that we dealt with. And as a result, the level of herd immunity that we would need, the level of people that we would need to be vaccinated is very, very, very high. So at this point in time, I think the conversation should really be about how can we vaccinate as many people as possible so that when or if they're exposed to the virus, they don't become severely ill, and it becomes kind of like this minor, mild illness where they do not have to go to the hospital, they do not have to be hospitalized, they do not have to get really sick from it. So that's where we're heading out. And I think, if we didn't have Delta, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But because we do, we've kind of shifted that conversation on herd immunity. Not to say, the vaccines are still very, very effective against severe illness caused by Delta. And so the best thing you can do at this point is to get vaccinated instead of thinking about what that new normal looks like. with the presence of Delta, that new normal means that COVID will become more endemic, which means it'll still be circulating in our communities, but it will not cause this level of chaos. It will not cause this level of outbreaks and waves. It will be controlled. And that's what we're aiming for. And one of the most powerful tools we have to be able to get there is through vaccines. So back to your questions about which team Pfizer, team Moderna, team AstraZeneca, it's something that a lot of people I've heard on Twitter, on Facebook, from my friends as well. But fundamentally, given how extremely transmissible and infectious Delta is, the first vaccine that you can get is the best vaccine, because they're all very effective at preventing severe illness. And instead of waiting and potentially being exposed to the virus, especially because you're in the midst of your second wave, and here we're in the midst of our fourth wave, you do not want to give your body that extra time to be exposed to a virus that is completely new, and instead you want to prepare it to fight back against it. And the best way you can do that is to get vaccinated with the first vaccine that's available to you. So whatever vaccine is available to you, get vaccinated, because that will be much, much, much better than risking waiting and being infected and becoming potentially severely ill. In terms of the different strains that are out there are a lot of different strains, and I know it's confusing. They changed the names. First it's beta, first it's numbers, and now it's something else. Well, initially what we started was calling the strains based on the countries that they rose from, which was not at all the right thing to do, because viruses spread. They don't care about boundaries. They don't care whether it emerged in one area or the other. They spread. And so I like the fact that we've switched it. So now we have alpha, beta, delta, and so on. It doesn't mean anything in terms of how large a strain is, or how, it's honestly just a nomenclature. It's for a way for us to recognize which strain we're dealing with. And right now, Delta is the big one that's spreading all around the world. So that's our main variant of concern at this point of time. I saw a question about the Mu strain. So the Mu strain has been spreading, emerging, and people are worried, is this going to take over Delta? Is it going to be worse than Delta? And so far from what we've seen in the data, it doesn't seem like it's going to be quote unquote worse than Delta, in the sense that Delta is so infectious that it's not allowing Mu to spread quickly, except for South America, where it is spreading, but then it's also declining. So from what we know so far, Delta seems to be the main variant that we're concerned about, because it's much more, again, transmissible and infectious than any other strains out there. So it's probably just going to beat every other strain that we currently have. And I think that goes back to my main message. If we want to make sure that other variants and other strains don't pop up, the best thing we can do is to try to control this pandemic and prevent it from circulating. So the way that new strains come up is when the virus replicates. So it exposes someone, it infects somebody else, it infects somebody else. And when it infects these people, you are giving that virus the chance to become slightly different. And that's how new strains emerge. And so the absolute best way we can do to make sure that we limit new strains from arising is to get vaccinated to control this pandemic and limit the potential that yet another strain will pop up, one that's even more infectious than Delta. So I hope that answers some of the main questions. Anything else?
Thanks for Prativa. We'll bounce between you and Athirah back and forth. I know you're quite keen also on answering some of the questions out there as well. I'll give the floor back to Nadia. Thank you for your time, Athirah. I'll come in a bit. Nadia, for your questions.
So as I can see on Slido, maybe I can rephrase the words from the question. And this is for Puan Athirah regarding the digital divide that we have right now, where some people have more access to technology and also Wi-Fi connection and some doesn't. So the question is, does Ministry of Health have different communication strategies for demographic that are not digitally connected, such as the elderly population and those in remote areas? So maybe Puan Athirah can have some input on this.
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. So basically, as I explained earlier, we did conduct several engagement sessions before we rolled out the national COVID-19 vaccination program. So within the community engagement, it was not only just the senior citizens We also engaged with the community leaders, for example, the Ketua Kampongs, the village heads, the Penghulus. So in the hope that, they can actually be the ones that are voicing and sharing the concerns from the public to the ministry and vice versa. So we engaged with the Penghulu and Ketua Kampong initially to, get their opinions, which they had quite a few opinions to share. And then from there on, we asked them to, bring in their anak-anak buah, the villagers, and the senior citizens as well. So because we know that not everyone has access to a smartphone, and unfortunately, not everyone has access to Health. So that's why we have options as well, for those individuals. And in terms of engagements for the different demographics, we used, for example, to the youth, social media engagement, which we had the live IG sessions, questions and answers, although not frequently, but we did have them previously just to tackle the issues that we understand, the concerns that people had as well. We had awareness via television. We had radio promos, articles. I'm sure you guys are a bit bored of hearing my voice already on radio if you are listening to the national radio stations. We had continuous articles, in interview sessions with the public health experts. We had the first time we had using RTB Go on radio, radio interview sessions with our doctors, our health experts. And then we also had the same concept on TV as well, using RTB Go. And we also reiterated the public health measures, so all of this vast community engagement, hopefully we hoped we're able to sort of communicate to the general public. So we were also tackling the youth, especially because from the youth, they can actually share the information to their parents who might not be able to, have the smartphones or the access to information. So it was a two-pronged kind of communication strategy as well. I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nadia. I can understand from your answer that I can see that MOH have done a lot of things to give awareness for people, not only for the young age, but also for the older generation, which I respect very much for what have been done by the MOH. And apart from that, I'm just wondering, with the Sinopharm in the news today, with the Sinopharm as the alternative to AstraZeneca currently, what do you think about the rumor that some people are saying Sinopharm is not a very effective vaccine because it is made in China? This is also a question from the Slido today. So how do the MOH react to this?
I echo Ms. Prativa's statement earlier. Regardless of any type of vaccines, it doesn't have to be Sinopharm, it doesn't have to be AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Novavax, or Johnson & Johnson. Any vaccine is effective against the COVID-19, especially with the new variants. So regardless, you should not have a preference. I do know there are people who have preferences, team vaccine, a Sinopharm or AstraZeneca. But actually, to be honest, I also got Sinopharm. Everything is okay. I did not, turn into a zombie or anything like that. I'm well. So it doesn't matter who manufactured the vaccine, where it came from. You should just get vaccinated when you do get the chance. So we should not be, divided between the types of vaccines or the manufacturers. You should just get vaccinated, basically. That is the stance from the Ministry of Health.
Thank you very much, Athirah. I hope soon that we can transform into the new normal where everyone gets vaccinated in Brunei. So does Fadli have any question?
Yeah, thanks, Athirah. I think it's also reiterating some of these things are actually already said. It's just different angles and interpretations from addressing one rumor to the other. I am just scanning through Slido at the moment. Just give me a sec. So I'm in my head, and I'm gonna put this up to either Prativa or Athirah as we enter into this new normal. So looking at a society where it's endemic, how does the new normal look like? And given there's always an evolving strain for viruses, I think one of the questions that I picked up here is that there are studies that show a drop in vaccine efficiency. As time passes, is there a need for everyone to take a third dose, or I suppose a booster for this? You guys have a response to that?
Do you want me to go first? Okay,
yeah,
I'll go first. Thank you. Yes, so that's been a question that science is currently investigating. And actually yesterday, there was a big meeting in the United States to discuss specifically this question about whether a third booster should be authorized. And at the end of the meeting, they decided that actually a third booster is not necessary because 6 months after being vaccinated, the vaccines are still working very well against severe COVID and hospitalization. And that's what we're most concerned with right now, is we want to make sure that our health systems aren't completely overwhelmed with new patients coming in. And so because the vaccines still work against severe illness, right now boosters are not recommended, particularly for the general population. There might be some exceptions made for people who are immunocompromised, people who have transplants, people who are older than 65, and that's because given their age and given their medical history or their medical situation, the vaccines aren't as effective for them. But for the general population right now, a third booster is not recommended. And I think the other question here is not just about boosters, it's also about how do we make sure that the vaccines that are available are spread out to as many people as possible globally. Vaccine inequity is very much a real thing, with certain countries hoarding so many vaccines, whereas other countries don't have any or have very limited supplies. So, from my personal opinion and from opinions of a lot of professionals, it's that we should be focusing on vaccinating the world with the 2 shots instead of worrying about a third booster for a selected few countries, because the only way to get out of this global pandemic is to vaccinate people globally. So anything else that you'd like to add, Ms. Athirah, to this?
I just want to expand on that before when Athirah comes in. You can answer that very same question. So I was also talking about the endemic, the new normal.
Right.
So I'm just going to pick up a question from Slido. Masks on or masks off? Talking about myths and all, with now us moving forward.
Yes.
Back to you, speakers.
Yeah, so I can answer this quickly. Masks on, regardless of whether you're vaccinated or not, definitely. Even if you're vaccinated, please keep your masks on. And I know there was a lot of confusion with communications early on I think I remember seeing a question here about how a few months ago, the VP of the United States said that we don't need to wear a mask if you're fully vaccinated. And that was because at that point in time, when we weren't dealing with Delta, we thought if you're vaccinated, the chances of spreading the virus is very, very low, so you didn't have to wear a mask. Right now we have Delta, and Delta has changed the game. And because Delta is a lot more transmissible, even if you're fully vaccinated, there is a possibility, a small one, but there is a possibility that you might spread the virus to other people, even if you yourself are going to be fine. And because there are still a lot of people who are not fully vaccinated, we want to protect not just ourselves, but the people around us, especially those that are very vulnerable, including kids who are not even, eligible to get vaccinated yet. And so even if you're vaccinated, please keep your masks on. Something that you might have seen is that, we're using a Swiss model, like a layer model. So it's not just vaccines alone, it's vaccines and masks and washing your hands and public health restrictions and so on, that all together will make us go towards this new normal. And so, yes, masks on.
Thanks, Prativa. Athirah, how does a Brunei life gonna look like?
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Prativa earlier, because she said that there's a vaccine equity. It's quite a prevalent issue, which I think it should be addressed, because in the context of Brunei Darussalam itself, we had difficulty in trying to acquire and procure the vaccines for ourselves. So as you can see there, it has actually affected us in terms of our vaccination program as well. And then in terms of how the new normal will look like, I agree as well. Masks on. We're not in the stage of endemic as of yet. We're only in terms of, we've been experiencing the second wave for a month plus now, and there's no way we will be, if we don't get as many people vaccinated, we won't be able to go to new normal anytime soon. So hopefully the aim is hopefully by end of this year or early next year, we will be able to vaccinate everyone since we have the supply of vaccines. But definitely mask on, social distancing, wash your hands, and definitely no mass gathering at this moment.
All right, thank you. I think that does remind me some of the myths that we've just had a lot of audience coming to enter in, yeah, about how we should take this in, especially masks and protecting ourselves, reminding that we shouldn't be complacent, don't want to repeat another second wave, and how we want to prepare ourselves better. Nadia, back to you for last round of questions. Being mindful of time, we have 10 minutes left for this session.
So since relating to what Puan Athirah said before, that Brunei is having difficulty to acquire the vaccine, but my question is going to Ms. Prativa. So since you are doing a research about the population, what do you think are the several factors that are not enabling equitable distribution of vaccine between countries, developed and less developing countries?
I think that is the biggest question that we're facing with right now. And I don't know if I have the answers. I do want to say that this lack of equitable distribution is a complete and utter failure, a moral failure and a scientific failure on both parts. We are dealing with a global pandemic, and like I said multiple times today, the virus doesn't stay within borders. And so you might have one country that's extremely well vaccinated, but if the virus is circulating somewhere else, we might have an emergence of a new variant, which will spread around the world again. So I wish that organizations and governments, especially those that have a lot of surplus of vaccines, they're not doing even close to what we would want them to do for a more equitable distribution. Pharmaceutical companies are also not doing enough for this either. They have the blueprints for how to create these vaccines. And so it's in their benefit and the world's benefit to share that technology to other countries, to ramp up manufacturing in other countries so that everyone can get vaccinated, not just those who can afford to pay their really, really high costs. So I think this is a larger question about, power and privilege and identity. And at the end of the day, just failure from a moral, again, and a scientific perspective. And I wish governments, organizations, pharmaceutical companies, all of them work together to ensure equitable distribution. And so something that we've been doing, or at least that I've been doing on my end, is to, push politicians and push my government to say, okay, we have surpluses. Where are they going? How are they going? When are they going? And I wish I had an answer for you, but at the end of the day, it almost feels like very powerful organizations and pharmaceutical companies at the very top are holding all of the power in terms of the distribution, and we're kind of at their mercy, which is not how it should be, especially not in the middle of a global pandemic.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prativa, for that answer. I really like how you delve more into that distribution of the vaccine, because my background personally is logistics. So I really like learning about how this distribution of vaccine in Brunei is going on and other parts of the world. How about Puan Athirah? Do you have any other input on the distribution of vaccine in Brunei? Like, does the supply right now is sustainable to get more people to get vaccinated?
I mean, at the moment, with the doses that we have received from both Australia and China, it has, in a sense, is sufficient to vaccinate. But we do know that in the context of the Delta variant, it has actually hit the younger population more in terms of the youth. So we do need to get Pfizer into Brunei and then quickly vaccinate 12-year-olds and above. So that is something that we are looking into as well, because we do know that it is affecting them as well, because they can't get vaccinated. So this is why we have always been emphasizing the need on getting those who are eligible to be vaccinated, please to get vaccinated when you have the chance to. And then I do know that there's a lot of frustrations as well in terms of, now that we have the vaccinations, there are a lot of these hurdles in terms of getting your slots on the Pru Health app and all that, and then trying to reallocate all of the vaccination slots. So from the Ministry of Health, we're trying our best to slot everyone back to their previous appointments. So all of these challenges that we're currently facing is sort of giving us a bit of a step back in terms of our vaccination program, but inshallah we'll get there. But in terms of the vaccines that we have at the moment, inshallah it is enough at present, but we are looking into getting other vaccine supply as well, as what Yang Muhammad Datu has mentioned before this. We're communicating with COVAX. We're communicating bilaterally with Pfizer, trying to get that in quickly. So there is, I also echo Ms. Prativa, there is inequity in terms of the vaccination distribution, because it has been very difficult for us and as a country as well, trying to get our vaccinations, because in the earlier stages, we didn't have the second wave, we didn't have any local transmission, so we weren't really a priority in terms of getting the vaccines with. But now that we have the second wave, alhamdulillah, a lot of the countries, our neighboring countries, helped us out when our vaccine supply was depleting, so that was good in a sense. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much, Puan Athirah, for that answer. I can see that there are a lot of other countries that are making to our country, which is we are very grateful for, especially for the first dose that the supply have been decreasing back then, but now there are more, and they're opening more appointment for the first dose of vaccine. So maybe if anyone wants to send more question on Slido, since I think most of the questions have been answered. And another question for Ms. Prativa. Can COVID affect a person by worsen part of the body that have inflammation, such as affecting a person's joint and make them disabled to walk? That's a question on Slido. So
sure, I can answer that. So from what we know, and we have, over a year worth of data of these vaccines now, that is not a side effect that we have observed. So, there's no medical, the list of medical ineligibility criteria is very, very low. Just a couple of months ago, I think we've even allowed pregnant women to get vaccinated with these vaccines. And I know this varies from country to country, but from a scientific perspective, there does not seem to be any suggestions to indicate that a medical issue will force you to not get vaccinated unless you're severely allergic to it, or you've had some myocarditis after the first shot. So there's a couple of specific medical issues that you might want to speak to your personal physician or medical provider for, but that particular inflammation is not something that I've seen in any of the data or the evidence. And on this also, I wanted to say that something that we've heard a lot about is people being concerned about side effects and long-term side effects. The way that vaccines work is that if there were any side effects, any large, severe adverse side effects, we would see them either very shortly after getting vaccinated or max 2 to 3 months after getting vaccinated. The clinical trials happened over a year ago, which means that if there were these large, severe adverse effects, we would have definitely seen them by now. And we have seen them for, a couple of, for the AstraZeneca, for example, with the clot issue, which is a very, very rare but existing issue. So all that to say is that people who are concerned about long-term side effects, we have the data for over a year worth of data by now. So if there were any larger side effects, we would have seen it by now. And because we haven't, that is why we're telling everybody to get vaccinated.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prativa, for that answer. That's very true. We heard a lot of things about the small part of the population are facing a negative side effect to the AstraZeneca, which creates some fear in some people to get vaccinated. But from what we can understand from today's forum is that vaccinated will transform our life into the new normal. So we still need to get vaccinated despite of what the vaccine is. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Ms. Prativa.
No problem. Can I actually add to that as well? I know people were concerned about the AstraZeneca vaccine as well. And I think you need to think about risk benefit in everything, right? There's a risk in everything. You get out of bed, there's a risk of something happening to you. And I definitely don't want to minimize the potential effects of people who have had severe effects due to the vaccine. But if broadly, you look at the risk and the benefits of the risk of getting COVID and getting the severe clots and getting all of these really bad side effects of the actual disease versus the potential small or the very, very, very rare side effects that are a little bit more severe with the vaccine. And we have an answer here that the vaccine way is the much more safer way of getting through this pandemic than to wait for COVID, especially with Delta, who we know is affecting everybody, including younger people. So, you kind of do a risk benefit assessment. If you have any concerns, speak to your physician, speak to your medical provider, speak to epidemiologists and people who can tell you a little bit more about how these vaccines work. But after doing a risk benefit assessment for virtually everybody, it makes much more sense from a data perspective and from a scientific perspective to get vaccinated.
Thank you, Ms. Prativa. How about another thing that I'm wondering, is how about people who are not really into science and they find it hard to grasp the idea of the vaccine? How do we approach them and tell them, raise the awareness that this vaccine can help them?
Shall I answer this one as well? Okay, thank you.
Oh, maybe Puan Athirah can answer as well if you have any input on the question.
Okay.
Please, Ms. Prativa, answer first.
All right, thank you. So that's something that we've been thinking about and talking about this whole pandemic, right? A lot of people don't have a science background, and that's okay. They still need to know what they're putting in their bodies, but they still need to know how vaccines work. So the way that I've handled it is to think about, making it a little bit easier to understand instead of using harsh scientific terminology, to kind of explain that vaccines at the end of the day are a tool that we're using to prepare your body to fight back against COVID. And there's a couple of different analogies that are going around. For example, there was one specifically for the mRNA vaccines that says that the vaccine is kind of like an email that you're sending your body with instructions for how to fight back and recognize the virus. And then once it's given your body the instructions, it disappears like a Snapchat, which hopefully young people will understand. And I really, really like that analogy because, it's an email, gives you the instructions, your body, figures out how to fight back against, or at least recognize the SARS-CoV-2 virus so that when you are exposed to it, it already has the antibodies ready to go and fight back. And then it disappears. And that's another reason why long-term side effects are not really a thing, because it disappears like a Snapchat. So, using analogies like that, using ways to really access and tailor the messaging to different people, specifically like what Ms. Athirah said earlier, if you're speaking to seniors, I don't think you would use a Snapchat analogy. If you're using to younger people, then you might use some of these more trendier social media analogies. And so really communicating to your public in a way that your public understands what you're trying to say and reaching their level. If language is an issue, making the language easier to understand, using photos, using images, just making science accessible and easy to understand should really be a priority when it comes to communicating vaccines, particularly in the middle of a global pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Prativa. How about Puan Athirah?
Yeah, I agree strongly. Okay. Can you hear me? Sorry, I muted myself. So I agree strongly with what Ms. Prativa said earlier. It's basically about communicating effectively with the different social backgrounds, taking into account their social backgrounds, beliefs as well. Because I know in terms of Brunei context, there were a lot of concerns in terms of the halalness of the vaccines as well, which we had to tackle in terms of that aspect as well, which we hopefully were able to tackle in terms of getting the Jabatan Mufti out, for the fatwa, and then trying to convince by evidence-based, I think, because if you are too scientific in terms of your communications, some people will not be receptive towards it, because you need to make sure it's something that they can understand. And then they can relate to. For example, what we always use what I always use, it's similar to the flu vaccine. The flu vaccine There's actually a lot of different brands. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Prativa, but basically there's a lot of different brands. We don't really care the type of brands that are being injected into our body. We just know that it's the flu vaccine. But unfortunately, with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the different types of vaccines are socialized and then commercialized, and then that's why a lot of people now have Google, Mr. Google, the Google doctor. So everyone is on Google trying to trying to research the different types of vaccine brands. So a lot of this has affected the vaccinations and vaccination rate, I think, and from the Ministry of Health. Our strategy has always been trying to communicate it in terms of, this vaccine is not something that is new, as what Ms. Prativa said earlier. So trying to make sure they understand, especially the senior citizens, make sure they understand that, from evidence we are seeing from the second wave, we unfortunately have death quite frequently. So that is something, that is very, very serious that we should be taking into account, and also the risk benefits as well, risk assessment as well. You should take into account, do we need to suffer does anyone need to suffer from severe COVID symptoms? Not necessarily, because it's something that you can avoid by getting vaccinated. So simple messages like that is very important, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Puan Athirah. How does Fadli have any other question for the panelists?
I think for now, I see an announcement there by Mims. I'd love to hear more from the audience live from the mic. I would like to see if we could just have a hands up, and then we can give a spotlight to you for you to present your question, if it hasn't already been answered from Slido. Just giving a couple of seconds. I do not see anyone raising their hands yet. Do we have a shy audience tonight? Or is everyone prepared to sleep? But I do want to take this opportunity to thank Athirah for those for the sharing as well, and from Prativa as well. I think addressing a number of things. Maybe while waiting for that question from the audience, which I am hoping someone will raise his hand. I think one of the things I found a point that I wanted to raise, coming into this new normal, the vaccines being the solutions. I think either one of you also mentioned about still not having the appropriate vaccine for younger kids, especially below 12. So I'm also picking up a question here from Slido. So how can we keep our kids safe if they can't take the vaccine? Do you have any views on this?
Would you like me to go first? All right, thank you. Yeah, so, the answer is actually quite simple. As long as the virus is circulating in the community, we're endangering people who are not vaccinated, and that includes kids. And so the best way to protect them is to reduce the amount of virus that's circulating in our communities, which means, yet again, to get vaccinated for those of us who are eligible. And so unfortunately, right now, yes, vaccines are not available for younger kids. It is being studied. I think from the data that I saw, we're hoping to have some sort of data coming in from the kids trials at the end of November. Don't quote me on it. It's sometime before the new year. We'll get data on both 5 to 12-year-olds as well as younger than that. And so once we have the data, once we can tell that the vaccine is safe and effective among that population as well, then we can start thinking about how we can vaccinate the younger population as well. But until then, because that's still a couple of months down the road, and by the time it's distributed and it's approved, it's going to take a little bit more time. Then the best thing we can do is for the rest of us who are eligible to get vaccinated. And that's all there is to it fundamentally.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Prativa. I think that does make sense, because we do have similar sicknesses, if that's the right terminology, where we're following a similar pattern, is just reducing that likability for one to happen by reducing the virus. I'd just like to open once again to the audience if there's anything, if there's a question that you'd like to present Otherwise, maybe if Athirah wanted to come in with her own response just now, if she wanted to.
No, I strongly agree with Ms. Prativa because as long as you can, if as long as you're eligible to get vaccinated, you should get vaccinated to protect those who can't get vaccinated. That's the only way we can actually minimize the risk towards the younger population. So I agree with Ms. Prativa.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to direct this to any global shapers in the room who'd like to take up that opportunity since we don't have an audience member yet. Anyone else who would like to raise their hand before we end the session for the next 5 minutes? I don't see any hands up yet. Actually, maybe more of a question for me. I think one of the things that's a lot more valuable thing is that community of shapers that really brought us together. And I think for Prativa herself, she's also a shaper hailing from a hub in Toronto. And I think with the work we do and acknowledging the work that both of you do as health professionals, we thank you for the sacrifice and all the fight that we're going through, especially in facing this pandemic. Athirah, with the everyday press conferences, I'm sure you were involved in the earlier one as well this afternoon, and the tireless work that you go through. For Ms. Prativa, as also a curiosity, I think I brought this up in the last pre-call, and I think with the work you do, you're a scientist, you reduce uncertainties by doing what you do, by checking facts and all. But with everything that's happening, I bet it's also quite overwhelming for both of you. How do you manage? And this reminds me of the article that you did, Prativa, about managing uncertainties by shaping it. Any thoughts on that? Perhaps we can just use that as a last few remarks before we conclude the session, and maybe bring up any housekeeping that we need to do. And just a kind reminder to the audience, we do have a feedback form. If you could just fill that in before we conclude the session, you could just do that while we have this space for the next 5 minutes. Prativa, Athirah, the mic is yours.
Thank you. You're too kind. All right. I can respond to that. It's a big question because I think, we've always dealt with uncertainty in some ways, whether it's personally, professionally, but I don't think at least our generation hasn't dealt with this level of uncertainty where, like I mentioned in my presentation, every single system that we're accustomed to has been driven a huge shock to the system, right? So everything around us is very chaotic. And I think when uncertainty happens, lots of people look for different coping mechanisms. And the hope is that for all of you that are dealing with uncertainty, that you use coping mechanisms that are healthy, that are, that you have the support of the Global Shapers community, of your friends and your family to deal with such monumental changes that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And this may sound naive and a little grand, but I think fundamentally, and that's something that I talked about in my article as well, is uncertainty at the end of the day needs to be embraced. I think at this point in the pandemic, we have no other place to be but to embrace it. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, and that's quite scary. But I think I like to remember that humankind and young people in particular are extremely resilient and have shown such fortitude despite all sorts of uncertainties in the past and in this current ongoing source of uncertainty as well, to persevere. It's forced people and governments to self-reflect, and myself as well, to self-reflect on where we've been, where we are, and where we want to be. And I think a common theme that we talked about today was this new normal. And I like to think that this uncertainty that everybody is going through right now forces us to kind of not just try to go back to the old normal that we had, but to reimagine a new normal that's more equitable, that's kinder, that's more driven by compassion and empathy, which is a lot to go through on top of a global pandemic. But we're all in this together, and you kind of have to embrace it and hope that you have the support systems in place and the coping strategies in place to do the best we can, given this global chaotic world that we're currently in.
Thank you for having those inspiring words, especially in such a troubled society we have today. And Athirah, please add on to say, I I think we're seeing Brunei, well, for me at my age, we're seeing such a more compassionate society in Brunei. We have businesses actually announcing, when they have positive cases, even though it's detrimental to their business, in the transparency, even having this whole community, creative community coming together to create this Oyen character, in reminding people it's okay not to be okay, and putting the energy, and hopefully organizations like Global Shapers is playing that part to help you in your work. Athirah, any last few words for Premier as well for the same question?
Yeah. Thank you, Fadli, for that. Yeah, I believe it's very important for us to take care of our mental health during this pandemic, because it's not only affecting our life, our lifestyle, our social lifestyle, but it is also affecting our mental health as well. So it's very important for us to take care of our mental health during this pandemic. Reach out to your family via Zoom or via WhatsApp call. Reach out to your friends, especially those who are affected by it. Reach out. Don't stigmatize patients, which I believe there are a lot of people being stigmatized, unfortunately, who are suffering silently, unfortunately. So please be kind to those who have actually recovered, if you know any. And if you do encounter rumors or those that are circulating out there saying so and so is a COVID-19 positive patient, please tell them they shouldn't be afraid of these individuals who have contracted COVID-19, and also be the ones who are championing against misinformation, basically, because you need people who will make sure that the messages that you receive from WhatsApp, from your family members, especially from your aunties and your uncles who like to share information without fact checking, please play your part in terms of trying to actively and softly trying to educate them. This is not true. We should make sure the information that you receive is true before you share it. And whatever information that you receive, if you're unsure, please make sure it's talked to you. So basically, during this uncertain time, I believe there is always a reason for everything. We should just make sure we are in this together. As like you said, our community is very kind. We're very supportive of each other. So let's try to make sure we support each other towards trying to face the second wave that we are currently facing. And we just have to be, bitawakal. I know it's a bit cliche, but we, in terms of, as Muslims, we should believe that everything happens for a reason. So tawakal is very important. So trying to make sure you have the support systems is also very important, I feel. And also from my colleagues as well, that's what we're trying to do, support each other, because I do know there are colleagues, like for example, your mother, who is probably exhausted from trying to take care of the patients, other frontliners, not just from the healthcare, but all sectors that are involved are also exhausted, because this has been ongoing since last year. So we should be there for each other, basically. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Athirah. That was just Athirah of the Ministry of Health, and Ms. Prativa, our PhD candidate from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And that is it for the Homebound Workshop series for this forum on vaccine hesitancy and misinformation. Thank you so much for joining us since 8 o'clock p.m. local time, Brunei. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for staying with us so far. Nadia, well done on co-moderating with me. I think that was a lovely moderation. But let's all give ourselves a hand of applause. Well, in this case, reactions. I'm just gonna clap my hand to yourself and to our fellow speakers and to the heroes behind the Global Shapers team, who's at the background, who's helped prepare the speakers brief, the graphics, getting all these photos together, and for our special guests, especially our speakers, for joining us from your personal time to be part of this this journey with us on vaccine hesitancy and misinformation. Also, thank you for all the audiences who are joining in on YouTube as well. We deeply appreciate that. And this is also part of a homebound workshop series that will be ongoing for the next few weeks. I'm sure Mims will be posting up a link here somewhere, or just check us out on our social media at globalshapers.bsp hashtag GSC homebound. We do also, once again, if I can just ask everyone to fill in the feedback form, we'd love to improve you on our next session. It's right in the chat box, and I know there's a QR code right now being posted up. Before I welcome the closing dua, would like to have a nice family photo. So if I can just ask, ladies and gentlemen, in this call, if you could just open your camera, if that's okay. If you look great for a nice photo together. As much as possible, and then we'll have a nice quick screen cap. Welcoming once again our participants to open their camera. That's okay. I see Danny, big smiles there, Jia Cheng, Nasri. All right, come in. I'm seeing more faces now. Thank you for joining us. Oh, there is our guest there from Ho Chi Minh. Hello. Anyone else? Let's do a quick photo as much as possible. Okay. Do we have Mims? Do we have someone taking the photo, or will you be taking it? Okay, you'll be taking it. That's great. We'll just get that photo in 10 seconds. I don't think anyone won't be opening their camera. I think we're seeing more there. We'll have a nice polite one, well, pleasant one in the first photo, and then maybe another crazy shot after that. All right, I see Valine just came in. Zahiro, hello. Nice to see the faces behind the names. Okay, I'm just gonna count, and I'm gonna remind myself to smile as well. All right, 3, 2, 1. And yeah, a nice pleasant one first. Mims, is that okay? And then we'll have another one. 3, 2, 1. And then we'll just have one last one just in case you missed your pose. Okay, 3, 2, 1. All right. I'm just gonna ask Nadia, how do you feel? Was that a well done session for you?
I'm just glad that I did it. And I just want to say thank you to Athirah and Miss Prativa for spending your evening and morning for Miss Prativa to have this valuable discussion and sharing session about misinformation during COVID-19. And also thank you very much to Fadli for assisting me in moderating this event for the very first time. My first experience in moderating. I will truly remember tonight. So that's all from me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I think we'll just have the closing dua and then we'll say our final goodbye.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Thank you very much, Awang Kulyakat. That was Surah Al-As. I think I just saw a message there from Athirah. She has just dropped her email if you'd like to stay in touch with her beyond the session. And if you do have any other questions or queries that may not have been answered, we apologize. But there you go. There is an email there from Prativa as well. And if you have anything that you'd like to get in touch with us on Global Shapers, maybe the upcoming homebound workshop or any other of our future initiatives, we'll be happy to. And yeah, we'd love to work again with you for Prativa and Athirah, if anything, to your work. Well, whether it's to showcase our Bruneians out there and to just help out in the work in fighting this COVID pandemic. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Fadli signing out. Wabillahi tawfiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Stay in touch, everyone, and see you for the next workshop, I suppose. Mims, cue music. Very Maria, very Maria. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
The next